Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today, I continue to bring you a familiar yet deeply emotional story about Hoài and Hùng, a story that feels very real and close to life, especially during these busy year-end days. As the year draws to a close, the atmosphere at Hùng workplace becomes more tense and hectic than ever. Work piles up endlessly, documents, plans, reports following one after another without pause, pulling him almost completely into the grind. Hùng often comes home late, sometimes it's already deep into the night, the streets nearly empty, yellow streetlights stretching along deserted roads, before he hurriedly finishes up and heads home. There are even nights when he has to stay on duty, with only a few dim lights left on in the entire office and the sound of wind blowing through the cold, empty corridors. In the rare moments when he has a bit of free time, Hùng can only take out his phone to send Hoài a few short messages, asking if she has eaten, how the children are doing, reminding her to go to bed early and not wait up for him. The messages are brief and simple, but they are the only way he can hold on to his connection with his family while work keeps him tightly bound. Sometimes, Hùng watches the phone screen light up and then fade away, a sense of guilt quietly rising in his heart because he cannot be by Hoài side more during these days. As for Hoài, she understands very clearly the pressure Hùng is carrying on his shoulders. She knows that the end of the year is a critical time, and that his busyness is not due to indifference or forgetting his family. She always chooses to be understanding, no complaints, no reproaches, so that he can focus on his work with peace of mind. Yet no matter how strong her reasoning may be, the emotions in her heart still cannot avoid moments of quiet emptiness. That morning, Hoài was on her way home after selling vegetables, just like every other day. The countryside morning still carried its familiar chill, the air lingering with the scent of damp soil and early dew. On her old bicycle, most of the baskets of vegetables were nearly empty, leaving only a few remaining bundles and some slightly bruised leaves after a hurried morning of selling. Hoài pedaled slowly along the familiar village road, a road she had traveled countless times over the years, so well known that every pothole and every bend was etched into her memory. The road was quieter than usual that day. The lively scenes of villagers gathering to buy and sell in the early morning were gone, replaced by the occasional motorbike or car passing by, the sound of engines echoing briefly before fading away. Everyone had their own business to attend to, everyone seemed in a hurry, as if no one slowed down enough to truly look around. Hoài rode on, thinking about the unfinished tasks of the day, about dinner, about the very ordinary worries of life, until a sudden image struck her vision, making her jolt to a stunned halt. In the middle of the empty village road stood a little girl, about 3 years old, all by herself. The child was tiny, lost in the vast openness of the road, her short legs trembling slightly as if she didn't understand what was happening. She stood there, wide-eyed and confused, completely unaware of the danger drawing near. In the distance, a car was speeding toward them, showing no sign of slowing down, the sound of its engine growing louder, heavier, and more urgent with each second. In that moment, every thought in Hoài mind was wiped away. There was no time to weigh options, no time to feel fear. She realized only one thing: if she were even a second too late, the consequences would be unimaginable. Her hands released the bicycle's handlebars, and she threw herself straight into the road, a cry catching in her throat, leaving only instinct driving her toward the child. With all her strength, Hoài yanked the little girl toward the roadside. The small body fit tightly into her arms, trembling but safe. At that same instant, Hoài lost her balance. She fell hard onto the cold road, her legs slamming against the rough asphalt. A sharp pain shot through her, forcing a deep gasp from her chest. Blood began to seep from her knee and ankle, staining the hem of her trousers red as a burning sensation spread rapidly. The screech of brakes pierced the air at the last possible moment, tearing through the silence of the village road. The car lurched to a stop only a short distance away, as if just a slight difference would have sent everything in a completely different direction. Hoài remained seated on the road, one arm wrapped tightly around the little girl, the other braced against the ground, her breath coming fast and shallow, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her chest. The pain in her leg was still there, but in that moment, the clearest sensation of all was the trembling weight of the child pressed close against her. English translation *. The man who had been shopping nearby heard the sharp screech of brakes and immediately turned around. In a split second, when he recognized the familiar small figure in the middle of the road, his face drained of color. He dropped the bag in his hand and rushed toward his child in panic, his breathing ragged, each step heavy as if fear itself were pulling him back. Only when he saw that the little girl was still safe in Hoi's arms, unharmed, not crying, did he finally let out a breath, his chest rising and falling as though he had just escaped a nightmare. He hurriedly pulled his daughter into his arms, his trembling hands checking her all over, his voice still shaken with fear. But just a few seconds later, his gaze fell on Hoi's leg. The wound was clearly bleeding through her dust-stained clothes, her face pale from pain. Hoi's strained smile was not enough to hide her exhaustion or the pain spreading through her body. The man froze, guilt and concern plainly written across his features. Without hesitation, he bent down and gently helped Hoi's to her feet. His voice was urgent and firm as he insisted on taking her to the hospital immediately. He feared that even the smallest oversight could make the injury worse. Hoi's shook her head softly, lifting her hand in a gentle gesture to stop him. Her voice was weak but calm as she said it was just a minor scrape, that resting at home would be enough, and there was no need to make a big fuss. Still, the man could not feel at ease. His eyes kept drifting to Hoi's leg, where blood was still slowly seeping out. In the end, he decided to take her to the nearest clinic. In the car, the atmosphere grew quiet, filled only with the steady hum of the engine and their still unsettled breathing. The man kept turning to ask after her, his voice heavy with remorse, repeatedly thanking her for saving his daughter in that dangerous moment. At the clinic, Hoi's wound was carefully treated. She sat quietly on the examination bed, her hand lightly gripping the edge of her clothing, clearly feeling each sharp throb in her ankle. The man stood beside her, his face still tense, his eyes following every movement of the medical staff. Only when everything was temporarily taken care of did he finally breathe a sigh of relief, though the sense of guilt in his heart remained. On the way back to Hoi's house, he continued to express his gratitude, his voice lower now, his eyes filled with both thankfulness and self-blame. The little girl sat behind them and refused to leave Hoi's side. Her small arms wrapped tightly around her, as if afraid that letting go would make the woman disappear. From time to time, she rested her head against Hoi's back, her breathing gradually evening out, a sense of safety evident in every small movement. When they arrived home, Hoi's tried to stand steadily despite the lingering pain in her leg. Out of politeness, she invited the father and daughter inside for some water. The house was quiet, filled with the familiar scent of wood and soft light that seemed to slow everything down. The little girl was exhausted after everything that had happened. When Hoi's picked her up, the child obediently wrapped her arms around Hoi's neck, her eyelids closing before anyone realized it. Her small face rested against Hoi's chest, her breathing calm and steady, carrying a complete sense of trust, as if this place were the only safe haven she knew at that moment. English translation *. In the brief exchange that unfolded between gentle questions and shared silences, Hoi's gradually learned that the man's name was Alex. He spoke about himself in a low, unhurried voice, as if he were used to not having to explain too much to anyone. Alex lived alone, having been both father and mother to his daughter all these years. His wife had passed away due to postpartum complications, a short sentence, yet enough to make the atmosphere in the small house sink quietly. He did not say more, only fell silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to his daughter sleeping peacefully in Hoi's arms, as though all his sorrow had been carefully tucked away behind that look. Alex's life, as he described it, was a series of quiet, repetitive days. Mornings were spent dropping his daughter off, evenings picking her up, stealing whatever little time he could to work and care for her at the same time. He did not complain or blame anyone, but in every word, Hoica could sense the hardship and loneliness he had endured. There were nights when his daughter ran a high fever and he had to manage everything alone. There were moments when he was so exhausted he wanted nothing more than to sit still, yet he still had to push through for her sake. Alex spoke calmly, but as Hoica listened, her heart tightened slightly. In return, Alex also came to know more about Hoica. She did not hide the fact that she was a single mother, nor did she avoid mentioning Hùng, the man she loved. Hoica shared that Hùng often had to travel for work, sometimes for an entire week, sometimes even longer. During those times, all the responsibilities at home fell on her alone. She spoke gently, without resentment, simply describing a familiar part of her life. Alex listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face, occasionally nodding softly, as if understanding the things that did not need to be spoken aloud. Perhaps because of their similar circumstances, the conversation between them flowed more naturally than either had expected. There was no awkwardness, no need for caution, each sentence followed the next with ease. They talked about their children, about hectic mornings, about simple meals that still carried warmth. The atmosphere in the small house gradually became unexpectedly warm, so different from the quiet stillness at the beginning. The light outside the porch softened, and the steady breathing of the sleeping little girl created a sense of peace that was hard to put into words. Hoica sat there, her hand gently soothing the child in her arms, while Alex sat across from her, his posture noticeably more relaxed than when he had first arrived. There were moments when they both fell silent, yet nothing felt awkward. That silence carried a sense of mutual understanding, as if each knew what the other had been through. Before leaving, Alex stood up and hesitated for a few seconds, as though he wanted to say something more. He looked at Hoica for a long moment, his gaze deeper, more deliberate. In that brief instant, a very gentle but unmistakable feeling stirred within him. It was not intense or overwhelming, just a quiet sense of fondness beginning to take shape, as naturally as the way he had stepped into this house. Alex did not speak it aloud. He only bowed his head slightly in thanks once more, his eyes lingering on Hoica's face, as if carrying with him something he had not yet found words to name. The next day, as the morning sun rose higher, two familiar figures appeared once again in front of Hoica's gate. Alex was holding his daughter's hand, carrying a neatly arranged basket of fruit. He stood outside and called out softly, his voice slightly hesitant, as if afraid of disturbing her. Hoica pushed herself up from her chair, her legs still sore but much better than the day before. Seeing the father and daughter, she was momentarily surprised, then quickly smiled and invited them inside. Alex asked carefully about Hoica's leg. His eyes lingered on her ankle, now neatly bandaged, unable to hide his concern. Hoica replied that she was doing much better, that with a few more days of rest she would be able to return to her normal routine. She spoke gently, not wanting others to worry, but Alex listened attentively to every word, as if afraid of missing something important. It was the weekend. Tony, Hoica's son, was at home. He came out of his room, curiously observing the unfamiliar guests. Alex's daughter quickly noticed Tony as well. With just a few exchanged glances and some initial shy gestures, the two children easily warmed up to each other. They sat close together, sharing toys, whispering and laughing softly, as if they had known each other for a long time. The sound of children's laughter filled the house, making the space feel far more lively. Hoài watched the two children play, her heart quietly softening. Alex, too, occasionally glanced at his daughter, the usual tension in his eyes gradually easing. The conversation between the two adults flowed slowly, revolving around simple, everyday topics, while the children's laughter became an invisible thread drawing them closer together. Suddenly, Tony turned and called out, "Mom," in a completely natural tone, his voice full of trust. Alex's daughter lifted her head, her eyes lighting up. She looked at Tony, then at Hoài, seeming to think for a long moment. After a brief moment of shyness, she timidly stepped closer, wrapped her arms around Hoài, and imitated the way Tony had just called her. The word "mom" slipped from her young voice, hesitant, soft, but unmistakably clear. That moment left Hoài frozen. She looked down at the child in her arms, her breathing slowing slightly. An emotion she couldn't quite name rose in her chest, warm, yet confusing. Alex stood there in silence, saying nothing. He looked at his daughter, then at Hoài, his heart suddenly tightening. In that brief instant, something became clear within him, no longer vague as it had been before. From that moment on, Alex knew he could no longer see Hoài as merely the woman who had saved his daughter. Her presence, the way she cared for the children, and the warmth spreading through this small house made it impossible for him to ignore his feelings. Within Alex, a more concrete and stronger desire began to take shape. He wanted to pursue Hoài, wanted to give his daughter a fuller home, and wanted to build a real family together with her. Hoài remained seated, her arms still around the child, her eyes unable to hide the turmoil in her heart. Everything that had just happened was too unexpected, too sudden, leaving her unable to fully grasp her own emotions. Meanwhile, Alex stood across from her, silent, yet his gaze now carried a clear determination, as if he could already see the path ahead, even though that path was still filled with unspoken words. How will Hoài face Alex's unmistakable feelings, when Hùng, the man she still loves, remains in her heart? Was that accidental moment merely a fleeting stir of emotion, or the beginning of an irreversible turning point? Where will Hoài choice lead this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next episode, where the story continues to unfold with even deeper and more emotional developments.
Không biết bị sao đây. Cho âm thanh vào đó rồi mình mới chỉnh hình ảnh tiếp nha mọi người. Hôm nay thì giờ mình mới làm video đầu tiên thôi, nhưng mà chắc là giờ mình làm xong rồi nên mình sẽ đi nấu cơm ăn cơm đó, tại vì sáng mình chưa có ăn sáng luôn.